is the moment we waited for. Everything you want is right here. We gon' give them what they came for. We gon' take it up from last year. Shoot 'em my shot, boy, I'm long range. Me and the team on the same thing. Stayed down, never switched up. Only thing changed was the game. I'm in the zone now. Nothing can change what we on now. When I pull up, know it's going down. Foot on the gas, ain't no slowing down. Aiming for greatness, no settling.
For an exclusive 3x skin effect, try Nivea Men Deep powered by black carbon. For 48-hour deep moisture, a fresh skin feel, and a long-lasting masculine fragrance. Make an impact with Nivea Men Deep Impact Body Lotion. Try Nivea Men Deep Roll On for 72-hour antibacterial sweat protection.
Yes, hi, it's Hannah here in Johannesburg. Yes, hi, I can hear you loud and clear.
the ANC and the Democratic Alliance in opposition party. So now the question is, what do those kind of more populous districts throughout the country look like, in particular here in Gauteng, which is, of course, to Johannesburg, economic hub here in South Africa. Potentially, the ANC could call back some votes there, but most of the projections that we're looking at is seeing that potentially the ANC is going to, for the first time in so many years, fall well below that 50%, potentially looking at even 40 to 42%. But And I had free steak. Exciting. I know. And it's hard
Ja, early morning. You don't hear anything, then you know they're
My parents are in California. I get now they want you to see TV, so they'll see it. And I'm like, you know, if I don't talk to them, I try it a few times a week. Because your daughter. She's young. But like 20. Oh yeah, two are No, you always will be. Always promise. That's what's been crazy with the little
Hi, Donnie. Just give it another go.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. If I can have your attention, please. Good morning and welcome to the media briefing on the HSRC's study on election satisfaction. I am Dr. Laki Titaunyane, the Head of Communications at the Human Sciences Research Council. So without wasting time, I'm now going to introduce my colleagues, some of whom will be giving us the presentation this morning. And immediately to my right, we have Dr. Benjamin Roberts, who is the Research Director in the Developmental, Capable and Ethical State Division at the HSRC. And then to his right, we have Professor Nania Bola Miller, who is the Divisional Executive of the Developmental, Capable and Ethical State Division at the Human Sciences Research Council. And then to the extreme right, we have Dr. Ngapeli Mkunu, who is the Senior Research Specialist, also within the TCS at the HSRC. So basically, we are going to take you through a presentation on the survey that was conducted on Election Day on the 29th of May 2024. And obviously, after the presentation, we will give you an opportunity to ask questions. So without wasting time, let me then give over to Dr. Ngapeli to start with the presentation. Thank you. Can we have the presentation on the screen, please? Thank you.
A very good morning. As Dr. Laki has already introduced me, my name is Ngapeli Mkunu, and I am a member of the Human Sciences Research Council's DCES division, part of the research team. So my job here is to provide an introduction and an overview of the research studies that we have been conducting over the years on behalf of the Electoral Commission as the Human Sciences Research Council. So one of the key measures of a strong election management body is its ability to make decisions that are based on empirical evidence. And this is something the Electoral Commission has attempted to do over the years. This dates back to the 1990s, where they have collaborated with the Human Sciences Research Council. This has been done mostly in two ways. The first one is the Voter Participation Survey, also known as the VPS. This study is a nationally representative survey which is embedded in the South African Social Attitude Survey infrastructure. It goes to field every pre-election year. So we did it in 2018, we did it in 2021, we did it in 2023, and we'll be doing it again in 2025 ahead of 2026 LGE. So far, we have got over 23,000 fully completed household representative surveys which were collected as part of this VPS study. We then have what we call the voter's voice. This is the election satisfaction survey. This particular survey takes place on election day across 300 voting stations across all 9 provinces in our country. Up to date, we have about 118,000, and when we checked the numbers in the morning, we had an additional 13,000 fully completed. So that takes the figure up to 130,000 fully completed interviews where the Human Sciences Research Council is able to measure and assess the voters' voice on election day across South Africa. So on the 29th, we went to our 7th national election. We all saw how the elections unfolded across the country, and the Human Sciences Research Council had a team of researchers all across the country. The purpose really of the survey is to ensure that we capture the views and opinions of voters. We all know that there will be observers, there will be key stakeholders, but one of the most important key stakeholders would be the voters who would have gone to cast their votes on election day. Some of the key questions we asked is whether or not citizens or participants felt that the elections were free and fair, amongst many other questions we asked, including, of course, many related to operations and general satisfaction with voting procedures. Now, from a methodological standpoint, I had already discussed that the ESS is through a 300 voting stations across the country. These voting stations were sampled quite carefully, working together with a team of statisticians and other research methodology experts. The realization rate of Wednesday's survey stood at 88%, and our margin for error stood at less than 1%. With that, I'd like to call onto the podium my colleague, Dr. Benjamin Roberts. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. So I'm going to run through just a series of graphics speaking to some of the main findings coming from the election satisfaction survey of 24. This graph that's currently on the screen compares 2019 in the blue bars to 2024. It shows the distribution of interviews, those 13,155 that Mapeli spoke to, and it shows the distribution across different time categories on election day. So you can see that 22% were done in the first few hours of election day, between 7 and 10:30. Another 30% were done between 10:30 and 2 o'clock. 34% were done between 2 and 5:30, and 14% were done between 5:30 and closure. Next. We asked them, when did you finally decide to vote in this national and provincial election? So we're again comparing 2019 to 24. 73% had made up their minds to participate more than 6 months prior to election day. 15% between 1 month and 6 months prior to election day, 6% in the last month, 2% in the last week, and 4% on election day itself. So the distributions haven't changed that much relative to 2019 and indeed some of the early elections that we've surveyed. We asked them, did the voting public, did any of the following reasons have a big influence on your decision to vote on election day? The dominant response from the voters was they voted because they still have an intrinsic belief that their vote makes a difference. 63% mentioned this as a response. This is a multiple response question, so they could answer for multiple choices. So the second, the runner-up was a sense of civic duty. So they said they voted because it's my responsibility to vote. So 43% of the voting public mentioned this as one of the key drivers of turnout. Other factors were related to more substantive issues such as trying to bring about economic improvement, to try and get good quality and reliable government services, particularly basic household services. Those were mentioned by close to 40%. as well as fighting against corruption. So a vote against corruption also mattered in election 24. Around a quarter mentioned to provide another party with a chance, as well as resonating with a particular leader or candidate. This is obviously a slide that is going to be particularly a source of some discussion, and that is how long did you queue before voting in this election? And here we've given a picture from 2009 national provincial election up to the current one. And you can see across successive elections from 2009 to 21, there was actually an improvement in queuing time. In 2024, there was a decline. And if you look at the dark green shaded bars, you'll see that relative to 2021, it dropped 70 percentage points in terms of queuing for 15 minutes or less. It's similar decline relative to the 2019 national and provincial election. In terms of those at the upper extreme, those who've queued for more than an hour, slightly over a tenth reported having to queue for longer than an hour. Just to say, we've looked at some of the provincial characteristics of that. Gauteng particularly had very much longer queuing times of over an hour. We'll come back a bit later to what effect has that queuing time had on electoral evaluation. So that comes towards the end, so we'll return to that point. We also asked about the ease with finding your party or candidate of choice on the ballot papers. Obviously, the ballot papers in 2024, we had the 3 ballot papers, but also on the ballot papers an unprecedented number of parties and candidates contesting, particularly for the national one, which is for the first time had to have a double column of names of parties and candidates. So I think what we've seen is, in terms of the ease of finding the preferred candidate or party, that has declined slightly, not dramatically, but what's happened is we've seen the share reporting it as very easy, falling from 69 in 2019 to 61 in 2024. And it's swung more to somewhat easy, which has gone from 27 to 32. We're not seeing a big surge in those finding it difficult. It's more about the degree of ease rather than ease versus difficulty. We asked a subsequent set of questions about ballot papers and ballot paper improvements. We found that the vast majority were pleased with the ballot papers used at the voting stations. 58% said they were very satisfied with the ballot papers, and a further 35% said they were satisfied. Just over a third, at 38%, said that they wanted to improve the ballot paper see improvements for future elections. In terms of what the main suggestions were, 51% wanted to see improvements relating to the size of party logos. They felt it was somewhat small. A further 38% wanted improvements in terms of the numbers of parties and candidates on the ballot paper. They felt that there was a proliferation, and they found that level of choice somewhat overwhelming. 36% of those who also suggested improvements relating to the size of the party names, acronyms, and the candidates' names. So common finding is issues related to size of the features on the ballot papers. Next slide. Now we move to evaluations of electoral staff. We first off asked a general question: are you satisfied with the quality of service that IEC officials provided to voters? Again, we're looking at 2009 right through to 2024. In the latest election, 63% said that they were very satisfied with electoral staff, with 31% saying they were very satisfied. So the dominant perspective is one of a positive response. In terms of trends over time, we've seen slight fluctuations, but not dramatic changes over the periods of the elections we've evaluated. Okay, next. We then moved on to more an evaluation of different attributes of electoral staff, and we asked about 7 particular characteristics ranging from honesty, professionalism, impartiality, etc. A clear majority of the voting public gave the officials a positive rating on all 7 of the indicators. The one that was most positive was the helpfulness of electoral staff, where 84% said that they were helpful to a great extent. The rate of the attributes that ranked the lowest, that was impartiality, with 71% saying that this applied to a great extent, with around 8% saying that the electoral staff were not at all impartial. Okay, next. Then we asked about to what extent the voting procedure inside the station considered the needs of special groups, and we asked about 5 particular groups in this case. Firstly, 54% said that they felt that the needs of women with babies was taken into account to a great extent, with 22% saying to some extent. A similar share saying pregnant women were considered at the voting station. And again, 57% for partially sighted and blind. Slightly higher shares said that persons with disabilities were taken into account, and the most positive evaluation was for older persons, the elderly. In terms of levels of information voters had about procedures, 61% thought the procedures inside the station were easy to understand, and 35% said they were somewhat easy. Around a tenth, at 13%, stated they had far too little information, and 10% said they had too little information about voting procedures. So there's still quite a lot of unmet demand for further information, which obviously the IEC can take account of in their future civic and democracy education events around the country. 42% of the voting public said the IEC website was very useful in providing information and education, with 23% saying it was somewhat useful. And in terms of the IEC voter education campaigns, 52% said the voting public said it was very useful, and 28% somewhat useful. In terms of the perceived effectiveness of the IEC's voter education campaign, again, we're looking over time on this one, but in 2024, 66% said that they were very effective, 24% somewhat effective, with small shares saying they were either not effective or uncertain. Again, there's been a fairly constant evaluation we've seen from the voting public since 2009 across successive elections. Next. Then we asked about the secrecy of the vote. So are you satisfied that your vote in this voting station was secret? In 2024, 64% said they were very satisfied with this, and 31% satisfied. There has been a slight decline in this, certainly relative to the 2009 through 2014 elections. The elections that have occurred since then, it's a bit lower, but it's been fairly stable from 2016 to 2024. We asked voters a set of questions related to self-reported coercion during the context of election 24. In this particular round of surveying, 12% reported experiencing someone trying to force them to vote for a certain political party or independent candidate. 9% reported that this happened before election day, and this, they said, was perpetrated 4% by party agents and 4% by friends and family as the dominant sources of this particular attempt to coerce voters. 4% occurred while they were queuing in lines, and again, the dominant responses were party agents of 2%, 1% friends and family, and 1% other voters. 2% said that some form of attempt at forcing them to change their vote happened inside the voting station, and the dominant responses here were, again, 1% party agents, 1% family and friends. Election officials were barely mentioned as a source of electoral coercion, less than 1% across all the different locations of attempted force. Of those that reported coercion, 73% reported that it had no bearing on who they ultimately chose to vote for on election day, but 25% said it did, and 2% were uncertain. So this translates, the 25% that said it did, translates to 3% of the voting public, which ultimately reported changing their vote due to some form of pressure. Okay, next one. So in terms of vote counting, we asked how confident are you that the vote will be accurately counted, and again comparing 2019 to 24. Here we've seen quite a drop in those saying that they're completely confident their vote will be accurately counted. It's dropped from 60% to 45%. Again, it hasn't swung to the negative end of the scale. It's a thinning out of completely confident and moving mainly into very or quite confident categories. But it does represent a substantive change relative to the last national provincial election. Next. So now we move on to the evaluations of the freeness and fairness of elections, and we're again looking over time. In election 24, 92% said that the election procedures were unequivocally free, with small percent saying yes with minor problems and an even smaller percent not at all. Again, over the full period that we're looking at, they have remained in a very similar range between 90 and 95%. And a similar evaluation on fairness, perceived fairness of the election, 92% of the voting public indicated that the elections were unequivocally fair. We did ask them the reasons for this. Lucky, next slide. We asked an open-ended question about why they perceived the elections to be free and fair. We've coded those open-ended responses using Atlas TI. And what emerged was several key responses in the way the public viewed, predominated in their responses. One key response in viewpoint was that the elections were free and fair due to a prevailing sense that there was freedom to make political choices without any form of force, pressure, and intimidation. The open-ended data tends to demonstrate that freedom to make political choices remains fundamental in the minds of the voting public. There appears to be a critical construct that is influencing political participation, the sense of freedom of choice for elections amongst the public. It remains key that all stakeholders respect the values of political freedom to make political choices. These have been coded into thematic concepts that inform judgments. So again, a high premium is placed amongst the public and their responses on the value of having the political space and being free from intimidation and to make their political choices as they see fit. The right to make political choices freely is a key value held by the South African voting public. The right to choose also links with fairness, and here participants tended to voice a view that fairness was found in having sufficient space and agency to make political choices when casting their votes. Again, it's, the take-home message is critically important for electoral integrity, that there's sufficient voice and agency for the voting public. This supports democratic legitimation and support for the electoral process as well as outcomes. We asked also, obviously, election 24, like preceding elections, has been a paper-based election. So we did ask one relating to a preference for paper-based versus electronic voting. So we asked voters, would you support or oppose replacing paper ballots with electronic voting machines at voting stations? We've analysed this by the time of day, but it was fairly invariant to the time of day. And what we found is that 29% strongly support moving to electronic voting, a further 22% support. So just under, or around about half the public are in favour of moving to electronic voting. 10% were neutral, 21% opposed, and a further 15% strongly opposed. So there is a fair amount of polarisation around paper-based versus electronic ballots as the future of elections in South Africa. I'm returning now to the issue of queuing times. And what we were very keen in looking at is what bearing did this have on a range of the different evaluations we've shown in the preceding slides. I'm showing the ones on the screen now. It might be a bit small for those at the back of the room. I'm showing that the scale of effect that it had on a range of different aspects of election 24. So what we found is the longer you queued for, the less likely you were to be confident that your vote would be counted accurately. So for those that queued up to 15 minutes, 81% said that they were confident. That dropped to 63%, a difference of 18 percentage points based on queuing time. So for those that queued for 2 hours or more, there was a huge difference in views on confidence in the vote count. Support for electronic voting, interestingly here, for those that queued for longer, they had a greater appetite for switching to electronic voting. Perhaps they felt it might speed things up in the future. Evaluations of electoral staff also differed by about 14 percentage points. I think it should be stated, though, that while it's lower, it's still quite positive in evaluation. So for those that queued for 2 hours or more, 82% said they were satisfied with electoral staff, but it is lower than the 96% who had queued for less than 15 minutes or less. And we also did it for the list of attributes, and you can see it varies in a similar range of about 13 to 17 percentage points on most of those attributes. Trust in the Electoral Commission, that one varied by about 13 percentage points. So for those that queued less, 15 minutes or less, it stood at 87% voicing trust in the Commission, but again, it falls progressively as you queued for longer. And for those that queued for 2 hours or more, trust in the Commission drops to 74%. So again, still positive, but significantly less positive than those who queued for 15 minutes or less. In terms of perceived fairness of the election, there was a 10 percentage point variation on that one. The difference ranges between 83 for those who queued the longest, up to 93% for those who queued the least amount of time. Safety and security, there's a 7 percentage point difference, similar for perceived freeness of the election. And satisfaction with the ballot paper had the least amount of variation. The difference was between 89 and 94%. So really, the queuing times did have an instrumental effect on assessments of election day, but it depends on the different aspect. But those who queued the longest were positive in the main, but to a lesser degree. So in terms of concluding remarks, the Election Satisfaction Survey 24 assessed voters' views of the election process, including its integrity, and evaluated the operational efficiency of the Commission. It should be stated, though, and I think it's important to note, this was interviews amongst the voting public, those who'd actually got through and cast their ballot. Discouraged voters, those who gave up after queuing for long amounts of time, were not interviewed. So the discouraged voters are not included in the sample. So I think it's important just to state that. These are the views of those who actually waited, prevailed, and voted. The results indicated that voters overwhelmingly believed that 24 national and provincial elections were free and fair, and they positively rated the conduct of officials at the voting stations. Trust in the Commission was high, and almost all voters felt they were safe to cast their ballot in secrecy. The majority of voters felt that the Commission adequately considered the needs of vulnerable groups, particularly the elderly and persons with disabilities. But lastly, queuing times at voting stations increased relative to more recent elections, quite by a substantive degree, which really had a bearing on election attitudes. So we'll conclude there and pass back to Lucky for handling the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. I will now open the floor for questions. If I could get questions specifically from media houses, journalists, that would be highly appreciated. I will start on the left. If I can get an indication of people who may want to ask questions on the left. I don't see any hands. I go to the middle. I see 2 hands, now 3. I will start with the gentleman with the red T-shirt.
My name is Norman Masungwini from City Press newspaper. The first question is relating to the issue of trust on the Electoral Commission to deliver the free and fair election. How much was that expressed by voters on the queue, considering the many glitches, which includes the element of your voter management devices and all the load shedding? And speaking of load shedding, was there any mention of such thing, and how much did it play on the voter turnout and the queuing for voters? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Lady at the back.
Thank you very much. Kenny Mapanga from SABC News. You spoke about the translation of 3% of all voters who changed their vote when you spoke of coercion. If you look at the 2024 national and provincial elections and how crucial this election is, as well as how every vote counts, does this have any impact on that assessment? Then, of course, what I wanted to find out is more of an understanding as to when you pick that sample. So there's 300, and then you picked, randomly selected 50 out of those 300 voting stations. A lot of people have a difficulty with understanding polls or these types of research as to how that will be representative of all these millions that have turned up to the polls. Please could you give us an understanding as to how that representation, rather, is present when you sample in this manner? Thank you.
Thank you, Kenny. Yes.
Christian Du Plessis from Netwerk 24. I just have a question on the waiting times. Can this be taken to be a true reflection of the waiting times, considering that you didn't survey people who left the queues? Thank you.
I'm Itumeleng from The Citizen. I'd like to find out, could we compare the queues to those in 1994? Is it safe to say that they were just as long? And I'd like to ask about the electronic issue. So the people that have issues moving towards electronic voting, were they mostly in urban areas or rural areas? Thank you.
Okay, I see another hand here, so we'll do it this way. I think we've had about 4 questions already from the middle, and so we'll take the 5th one from the lady over there, and then in the next round we'll go to the right. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Simple. What is your take on the issue of people who were turned back and without being offered an opportunity to vote?
Sorry, can you stand up, please?
Okay, thank you. What is your take on the issue of people who were turned back without being offered an opportunity to vote on the national ballot paper, and then later there were people who were offered to vote on the national paper? Was it fair or something?
Thank you very much. Ben? Yeah.
Thank you very much for those questions. I'll start with the issue of trust. So trust in the Commission is actually, amongst the voting public, is very high. It's in the, well into the 80% range. I know your question was about the relative impact of VMDs, load shedding, etc. So that really doesn't come through that strongly in the data we've collected particularly. I think obviously it would come through in queuing time reports and obviously in this open-ended responses around freeness and fairness. So it's not coming out as a dominant response in what we've collected. I think some of the other surveys that are post-election surveys may capture some of that discontent. But it's certainly of the voting public, the trust in the Commission remains dominant. The other thing I want to state is Dr. Mchunu mentioned the 2 surveys we do. One is a pre-election survey, and one is which is of the whole voting age population, and the other one is the election day view experience, which is the views of just the voting public itself. In amongst the general public, trust in the Commission has been declining, as it has in most core political institutions over the last decade and a half.
although the IEC does remain one of the most trusted institutions in the country. But obviously the voting public the trust is much higher. And that's probably for two dominant reasons. One is obviously the fact that many of the people we've interviewed have come out of the voting stations and had, generally speaking, perhaps leaving aside some aspects of the queuing time, a positive experience, and that translates into a positive evaluation of the Commission. The other one is that for many South Africans, the predominant response to unhappiness with the functioning of the political system is abstention. It's not electoral turnout. So we're finding increasing polarization between happier voters and the discontent abstainers. And that's what's probably driving those positive evaluations. On the one about, I think the SAB News question about those that reported changing their vote due to some pressure or force, I think it's, from a sort of every vote counts, it is concerning. Just to say, which we didn't put up, is it's been increasing over time, particularly since the 2016 elections. We've seen the reporting of, self-reporting of coercion increasing over time. It particularly jumped higher in 2019 and 2024. So it's something that we really have to watch out for. Just to say that it's happening predominantly before election day in households, in communities, that forms of pressure. But it is something that we do need to worry about because it is translating into 3% of change relative to what they might have voted for on election day. So it is something that we all, as concerned citizens, need to monitor and be wary of. In terms of, there was a question that SABC News also asked about methodology. So this is as Dr. Mchunu again in his introduction said, this is a random sample. So obviously of all the voting stations nationally, our statisticians randomly chose particular voting stations, taking into account provincial distribution of the registered population, and certain other attributes of the voting public. Once the data is being collected, it is then weighted to make sure that it is representative of the voting population, the statistics we have from StatsSA. So it is designed, although you may think, well, it's only 300 out of the 22,000+ voting stations, it is designed to be properly representative. And also the 50 interviews we do are designed to be staggered across different times of day to ensure if there are problems at certain times, those come through in the sample of respondents. So if there are problems at the tail end of the day with excessive queuing times or problems with late opening times in the morning, those would come through because of the way the sample is configured. So it is designed to be properly representative of the voting public on election day. In terms of waiting times, I think that was a question about, does the queuing time we're recording reflect the true queuing time? I think, as I said, we don't interview discouraged voters. So those who may have given up will have left, but for those that persevered, even if they waited many hours, like 6+ hours, would be included in the sample. So I think it is a fair reflection, and that's what's coming through on that increase. We are still to release, after today, a more in-depth analytical report for the Commission, which will give a whole range of breakdowns on where were the queuing times and how are they different across different geographies and so on, and that will give you a sense of the scale of variation in some of those queuing times, because there were big differences between rural and urban stations in many cases. So those will be coming once we've processed that, produced that fuller report. In terms of the citizen, in terms of queuing times relative to 94, we weren't surveying in 94, so unfortunately we don't have survey-based evidence on the average queuing times going back that far. Just to say that obviously it's the upswing we've seen is a significant one. It's the highest one we've seen since 2009. So certainly the highest we've seen in 15 years, 15 years. Whether it's higher than in 94, difficult to say. I doubt it. I mean, I was old enough to have voted in 94, and certainly based on observations from that time, those queues were particularly long, but that's more anecdotal than empirical. The urban-rural split, the citizen also asked about the urban-rural split. I didn't hear the latter part of the question, I assume it's in terms of queuing times again, and that's something that we'll certainly publish in our more detailed report to come. There was another question about, I think it was the last one, which was the impact on people that were turned back without being offered an opportunity to cast their ballot. I think the Commission can probably respond best to that. They are going to have a media briefing later today, and I think that's something that they're best placed to answer. Certainly when we do the 2025 pre-election survey ahead of the 26 election, we'll be asking the general voting public more, because of the experience of 24. We'll be asking more about queuing and being turned and not getting to cast a ballot because of giving up and being discouraged. So we'll be able to find out more with a retrospective evaluation with the next VPS, which is happening in 2025. Yeah, I'm going to hand over to my colleagues to see if they wish to add.
Thank you very much, Ben. There are just a few things I could perhaps emphasize so that we understand the context of this particular survey. This is not a survey of the South African population in general. Thank you. It is a survey of people who cast their vote and exited the voting station. And that's where our field workers were, and that's where they were interviewed. So we do not know what people sitting at home who were abstaining or were discontented, we do not know how they felt on election day. And that's important to remember. We also do not know why people, if they did, why people dropped out of the queues because they had to wait so long, whether they came back and voted later. That is something that our survey did not test, because as I said, we interview people as they exit the election station. And so our questions are based on the experience of the election process. And this is also the population sample of voters who trust the IEC. As Ben mentioned earlier, we have a voter participation survey where we can see that decline in trust in institutions. The IEC is relatively trusted institution compared to many others. But our division also runs something annually called the South African Social Attitudes Survey. And in that survey, we have some interesting data on trust in institutions. But this is we interview household survey of people 16 years and older, and it's representative of that population, not only the voting public. So I just wanted to emphasize that fact, and that we cannot speak about what we have not ourselves collected, the data that we have not ourselves collected. I was interested in the question about the long queues versus in 1994. It appears that the queues were quite long this time around, more because of failure of devices and things like that, the three ballot papers and so on, and not necessarily the numbers of people who turned out. So the CSIR has been doing their number crunching, and they are projecting the voter turnout, but it's certainly not as high as it was in 1994. I think almost every South African went to vote in 1994.
Thanks, Prof. Nanya. I just want to touch on the trust factor. So generally, trust is influenced by perceptions, but also by post-experience. So in many institutions of state that we've surveyed, the post-experience tends to favor the institution, meaning that once someone has seen or experienced the institution and its and what it does or how it works, they are more likely to be more trusting of an institution. While if they haven't really experienced it, based on perceptions and everything that they see, they are less likely to be trusting. This also becomes particularly important in the age of misinformation, propaganda, and decontextualized information that tends to be shared on social media. Also, with regards to the sample, as Dr. Roberts did indicate that it was 300 voting stations. However, we did not necessarily try to focus mostly on just the voting stations and the number of people. We try and find the perfect balance between the three, because you can have a survey of 200,000 people, but if you're sampling and your methodology is flawed, that will not necessarily represent or be representative. So we must be careful to not always assume that if you have a big number of people participating, then that study is representative. So that's something we try to guard against. Thank you.
Thank you, colleagues. I will now open the second round of questions. Going to my right, I see Faith Daniels, and then two other hands at the back. Faith?
Hi, Faith Daniels from ENCA. I just have a question, a follow-up question on the electronic voting issue. Because it seems that it's becoming an issue, and I didn't see how it fared with the previous election. Is that something of concern that you would think that the IEC should pick up and sort of discuss as a matter of urgency?
Thank you, Faith. At the back.
Thank you very much. My name is Ngosi Kona Malingamnisi from Power FM.
Can you just stand?
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. I've just got three brief questions. The first one relates to whether or not you'd consider extending the size of your sample in future, because one could perhaps argue that 300 voting stations compared to the thousands that we have across the country is a drop in the ocean. So is that something in the future that you could potentially look at? The other question relates to, did you perhaps ask those that you engaged, just in terms of the introduction of the third ballot, particularly it being new in metropolitan municipalities, and perhaps what were some of the responses that you received? And then just as a question of interest, this is something I observed, were there any individuals that you engaged that spoke about their vote being influenced to some degree by being transported in vehicles that were branded, you know, in colors of certain political parties? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's Naomi Kobe here from YFM. I just wanted to ask, an issue of clarification on the Section 24A application. In terms of the interviews you had conducted following, the elections, I suppose what was the sentiment you were getting from voters there, especially, we are hearing there was some difficulty with people being able to participate and vote this year with regards to that. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I will allow the panel to respond to the questions, and then after that, we will quickly open the last round of questions for you. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll start with Faith's question from ENCA. In terms of electronic voting, it is being taken seriously. In last year, we did an initial study for the Commission relating to electronic voting, looking particularly at experiences around the globe. I don't think it's certainly not something you can walk into lightly. It's a huge change in terms of voting procedures. And it would require quite a few years to actually pilot, look at those experiences, and before it is decided whether or not to fully adopt it. We are currently in this conversation with the Commission about, and the plans are over coming months, to prepare a discussion paper on electronic voting as the basis for a potential green paper on electronic voting. So that's something that will obviously be used as the basis for quite widespread consultation with different stakeholders around this, and we will see where that goes. But I think it's also something that the Commission would probably wish to engage with around responding to from their perspective, views on electronic voting, but they have commissioned this second part of work about the development of a discussion paper. Just to say, from the surveying that we've done, including in not just this survey on election day, but particularly our voter participation survey pre-election, we do ask quite a few questions around attitudes towards electronic voting, and there is still quite a lot of skepticism amongst the public. So there is this division amongst the public about whether or not it would be a good thing. That includes amongst the youth, people that people may think ordinarily would be pro-conversion to electronic voting. So I think there's certainly views around its, that favour its adoption around convenience, etc. But there are also concerns that it brings around issues of security and so on, and probably aspects about reliability. And I think it may be that the experience 2 days ago with the VMDs might also serve as a polarizing aspect in terms of propositions around the introduction of electronic voting. But that's something we'll have to look into, and it's something that would probably come up in the consultations and dialogue around any decision to move towards electronic voting. On the Power FM questions, the questions around sample size and 300 stations, I think it goes back to the points raised by Dr. Mchunu again around the fact is this is a representative survey of 300 voting stations. The responses have a margin of error of the 13,100 respondents of less than 1%. You could expand size, but it wouldn't improve, you probably wouldn't see much of a difference because it is designed to be representative. So adding more stations will not materially change findings because it is designed to be representative. On the 3 ballots, we had this discussion in the lead up to the election day with the executives from the Commission about whether we should explicitly ask about the 3 ballots. We ultimately didn't because we didn't want to prime them. So we wanted them to spontaneously mention whether having 3 ballots represented a challenge in terms of the usability and effectiveness of voting. So we did have an open-ended question about why the public was satisfied or discontent with ballot papers in NPE 2024. I must confess we're still to analyse in depth that open-ended content, and it will form the basis of our more detailed analytical report. So we'll be able to determine from that whether 3 ballots did represent a challenge for the small segment that were unhappy. As you saw from the statistics, the large share were actually content with the ballot papers and found them easy to use. So there's only a small segment that were discontent, and we'll see if those did mention the fact that there were now 3 ballot papers with many names of parties and candidates on them as a challenge or not. The question around vehicles branded by party colours, that unfortunately is not part of our surveying, so we can't comment on that. Over to my colleagues. Thanks. Oh, the section 2.
Thank you very much. We do not have data on the Section 24A issue, probably because most people were affected to the extent that they ended up not voting, and we cannot make any predictions around that, and we have no data as to how many people were affected by the Section 24A issue, but it is a serious one, and we are aware of the fact that there were problems, but that is just from the media and not from our research. I also want to emphasize the fact that we have started looking quite seriously at the issue of e-voting, although the South African public is very divided on this issue. But what was interesting was the longer people queued, the more in favor of e-voting they were. So they obviously think it'll speed things up. But in other studies, we found that people are a little bit nervous about e-voting. And then again, the sample size, as Ben said, we could have, interviewed many more people, and we would probably have come out with the same results, because we have statisticians working with us, and we do science. So that is how it works: weighting of the data, the accuracy of it, and the fact that it is representative of the voting public. Perhaps we can have a more technical conversation later.
Thank you very much, colleagues, Dr. Roberts and Professor Nania Bolamila. I'm now going to, in the interest of time, just take one or two more questions, and then we close the session after that. Starting from the left, if there's still no one from the left, I will take the question from Mr. Masuku, and we'll close after that. Thank you.
Norman Masungwini again from City Press. Can you please talk to us? You spoke about the people self-coerced when they were going to vote. Can you talk to us about self-awareness? How much people were, aware that they have got a constitutional rights and then their obligations to vote? Also on the issue of, or vis-a-vis the issue of the political parties' presence, personalities, and manifestos, manifesto launch. How much did that persuade people to go out and vote? Thank you.
Thank you. Before Ben comes in to answer, just to indicate that the panelists will be on standby to do interviews later, and also that the report will be posted on our website as well, the HSRC website. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for that question. In terms of how aware they have their rights and obligations to vote, I think citizens are quite aware of that. As we saw, one of the dominant reasons people turn out is because of that sense of obligation. So I think it is quite deeply embedded in South Africa, and people are aware of that. In terms of the relative influence of manifestos, etc., in influencing people to turn out and vote, that we don't really have evidence on. I don't think we can actually really comment on that particular issue. I'll hand over to colleagues if they wish to reinforce.
Thank you. Just the issue around the duty to vote, or the sense of duty to vote. Most certainly, if you go to a station and you stand in a queue, you really feel that it is your civic duty to do so. Of course, if you're at home and you're abstaining, you do not believe it is necessarily the thing that you need to do for yourself, and it is a valid form of protest. But in the South African Social Attitude Survey, the data from 2023 told us that the general South African populace, aged 16 years and older, of them 70% believe that we have a duty to vote, and that we should vote. However, when we ask if people believe that their vote counts, that their voice counts, there's a drop. So there are far less people in South Africa who believe that their vote counts. They believe that democracy is right and we should vote and there's a duty, but when it comes to whether it actually counts, we have a much lower percentage.
And just on that point about manifestos, I think our data shows us that this is across the VPS mostly, and it dates back maybe 10, 15 years. South African voters tend to be abstainers if they are unhappy with the party, hence the higher turnouts we've seen in the past couple of years. So we do not have any evidence of manifestos influencing potential turnout. What we have seen in our data is that South Africans are more likely to just stay away rather than either give a party another chance or another option, which of course involves or revolves around going to vote. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. That concludes the proceedings. Thank you very much.
What's on my? Huh? Yeah. So we get the boards at the
Capture
back. Yeah.
the road.
Oh.
Sorry.
Oh, good.
Thank you. One for the ladies. You finish and then you take one for the ladies.
You finish with the selfie.
The commissioner.
The ladies.
The ladies only.
Let me just finish with the cell phone.
Thank you.
Good. Number one.
Thank you.
Oh.
Yes.
Sorry, I just need a big one of those. Oh. Please bear with me. Just keep our eyes open. Okay. Almost done. Thank you.
No, we met with a different, but they were here, they left this morning. Yeah, no.
Sharp but hard man non dia kan cité ki na shooting ya sharp mara out ya bulela sharp lin yo that's why me ser lo ala cause kya mutakir hard kya fast marum puta nonsense kira prayam ngai zile ora sharp ne hard
The worst they did was to dance. They use it so enthusiastic. I don't know what. Kim informed us that you have 200% increase. What was the strategy?
Well, it's what's there. There's the strategy. There's the strategy.
communication center also. Yes, communication. Yes. So we're all part of the outreach.
what, am I not supposed to have the guest on the screen? Yeah, but we're going to be speaking to CSIR about numbers, guys. Yes, we're going to be speaking about their predictions. It's actually bookmarked there on the screen from input. Yeah, you can sit. So am I not standing at the screen and they're sitting on the chair? I'm just sitting with them. That's what they're saying in rehearsal. Yes. My guess is way after the play. It's not now. Am I leaping to Kenny?
Okay, cool. All right. All right. Go.
I'm looking at you now.
You look at me.
Fantastic.
Okay.
Am I fine here?
Yeah.
Cool.
You want me to record as well?
Yes, please, because
Live and
for the, yeah.
Okay. Sound check and let's go for it.
Can I get you? 1, 2, 1, 2, 5, 2, 3.
One more.
Okay, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2.
6, 7, 8, 9. Recording, let's go.
Okay, cool. I think I just want to first start. We're seeing interesting numbers on the board right now. Is it surprising where we are seeing, first let's start the MK party backed by former President Jacob Zuma?
Well, you know, where we are now at just over 2 million votes that have been counted, verified and uploaded to the leaderboard. It's a good number to start seeing what are emerging trends. But the numbers are coming in very slowly now. At some point in the morning, there was quite a lot of momentum, and it seems as if MK might end up at about 250,000 by this time. But I mean, I know that voting has been quite slow. It's not, to me at least, it's not entirely surprising because I do research. And I was in KwaZulu-Natal in February where I did 6 focus groups. I came back out of that study knowing that the ANC would be in trouble in KZN in this election. Maybe not to this extent, but what gave me a window was when I was doing a focus group in the lower South Coast, which is an ANC stronghold, and the ANC was being outnumbered in that focus group in terms of people who intended to vote for MK. And it's been amazing at how MK has managed to filter its message to ordinary people. And the message really is propaganda. It's propaganda in the sense that they make things that are not realistic, believable, and turned into a reality, like a 2/3 majority. They were never going to get a 2/3 majority, but people began to believe. Like they talk about, you know, the ANC of Ramaphosa. There's one ANC, there's no ANC of Ramaphosa, but that propaganda machinery has really been excellent for MK. So I'm not entirely, surprised, but what is beginning to show up in KZN is that MK is probably eating from everybody, lunch, dinner, breakfast, and some dessert from the EFF. I mean, if you look at the EFF, they have been stagnant around that 5,000 votes cast. And this is significant because the EFF got 360,000 votes thereabout in 2019. Of course, the urban vote is not necessarily all in, and it's going to be interesting to see how MK performs in those urban settings.
And speaking about, what we are noting about the ANC in particularly, looking like it's too early to note, but it could not make majority. And if it gets to a point where we see that the ANC is not going to win majority and will have to start forming coalitions, who do you think they should start talking to right now at this point?
Well, I think there's already some flirting happening. So what I've been actually interested in is the high caliber of politicians that have come to the Rock just at 20% of the count. It doesn't necessarily happen that way, that you've already seen the chairperson of the ANC, Gwede Mantashe, here. I've seen now Helen Zille of the DA is here. The IFP has deployed its national spokesperson. Michael Beaumont of Action SA is here. And I can count. So it tells you that there is a need, because this is where it starts. This is where feelers get put out and get started. But it may well be too early to think about who do you go flat with, because the coalition arrangement or the arrangement of numbers and outcomes in Gauteng province will be different to the numbers arrangement in KwaZulu-Natal. So the talk about a national coalition must also actually consider provincial coalitions, because the most stable coalition is what I call a global coalition that will be effective at all the three, at the province of KwaZulu-Natal, province of Gauteng, and nationally. And for that to happen, it introduces a very, very difficult and probably complex conversation.
And with that being said, I think we might easily predict who the winner is going to be. Oh God. What particularly makes this election interesting? 30
When President Ramaphosa came into power in 2019, with all this zeal of send me, tuma mina, the Ramaphoria that was there, it's the sheer disappointment that he has not delivered in the kind of change that he was expected to. Instead, we've seen worser indicators under his leadership. The issue of power blackouts, the issue of unemployment, the issue of cost of living, the issue of interest rates, the issue of the exchange rate of the currency exchange. Those have then been compounded by COVID-19, corruption in COVID-19, July riots, flood and the response thereto. And some instances, people feel these things, government could have responded better. So I think that's what has been at stake here. Some level of excitement and euphoria that President Ramaphosa would be an antidote to former President Jacob Zuma, only for him to actually have some very poor outcomes, poorer than the tenure of President Jacob Zuma. But I think this is a breakthrough moment for South Africa. This is a breakthrough election because it finally tests the South African election. We know in some countries how liberation movements have behaved when they are threatened with the loss of power. At least we have seen an ANC that has not really tried to tamper with the election. They have not tried to remove electoral officers. You've seen in some countries a president will fire the chief electoral officer just on the eve of elections because they are trying to manipulate the integrity of the Independent Electoral Commission itself. So those have been encouraged. That there's been a space for South Africans to believe that they can truly cast their votes and make their choice. And that their votes would count without being manipulated. There may have been glitches. That's the first test. The second test is at the level of the outcome. Once the party has lost power to its members, its voters, and to society, for purposes of social stability, for purposes of peace, and for purposes of ushering in a new government. What assists in this equation is that the ANC still has a plausible possibility of being part of that coalition government and therefore cannot claim that it is, entirely shipped out of power.
My very last question, should we be worried about NK and Zoo? Because there's a chance that in the biggest provinces, they will become part of the king-making decision.
I don't think you should be worried about them per se as entities. I think we should be cautious about the people they are going to send to parliament. Some of the characters really who are on those lists, I mean, you look at Des Van Rooyen, former minister in Zuma's government, but really did not deliver much, whether he was a weekend minister for finance or his tenure at cooperative governance and traditional affairs. You look at people like Duduzile Zuma, daughter to former President Jacob Zuma. Nobody can really vouch what they maybe have run previously. In some of the provincial lists, you actually struggle to get the track records of some of the personnel there who may actually, in another universe, become members of the executive committee in government in those provinces. So I think I worry about the quality. There's still a lot of worry about the intention of the party. The party is really a response to internal political, factional dynamics within the ANC rather than a response to the challenges and that face the people of South Africa. Thank you so much.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Sharp. All right. Okay,
Happy hunting.
Huh?
Happy hunting. Okay.
Yeah, there. You're going to look at me, okay. Counting the questions. Two, I promise. And if I'm nice, you'll amuse me with one more.
Just a sec, as I sort out my focus, please.
How do I make you a member of MK?
Yes, I sit in the coordination executive.
Okay, so the executive of MK. Can we do a quick test?
Sounds.
Okay, do you want to count to 5?
1, 2, 3, 5.
Another test, please, is it good?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Fantastic. I'm
Okay,
recording.
okay, cool. Good. Okay, cool. Tutusile, thank you so much for talking to us. I think my first question is, are you surprised in any way at the numbers that we're seeing? There's about 2 million votes that have been counted so far. Did you expect this reception?
We're still gunning for 2/3 majority, so we were expecting something, you know. So, but we are happy what we have. Yeah, and we're grateful to the voters for going out to vote. Yeah.
And I mean, the voters seem to have trust in MK and the change that you're going to bring.
Yeah.
Just elaborate for us, I mean, what does the party stand for and what are you, you know,